Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, esteemed colleagues, the usual YouTube viewers, let's get the ball rolling on some Terminator videos here. So this applies to a lot of things, of course. People get a standalone and they're like, man, I got an all motor setup. What kind of timing do I run? I have some base files available. Some people don't know how to use them or dig them up. They still struggle knowing what to do with all of it anyway. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at a timing map for the Holley system. A lot of systems are very similar, and I'm going to give you some guidance, what to start with. Questions are coming up every day, and it's a disservice, I feel, if I don't give some suggestions here. So there's a lot of things to take in to make your decisions here. So what I will do is I will generalize, and I will tell you where people say, where should I start? So before people get mad right away and say that this is not optimized, that's the point. This is where you start. If you're afraid you're going to hurt something, if you're afraid you don't know what you're doing, if you want to make sure you can drive it and make some hits and make sure it's erring on the safe side before you do anything else, this is what you do. So we're going to try to build a responsible base setup here. So I have zeroed this out at 12 degrees everywhere, and I want to show you what you're going to look at and how you're going to start and things you should practices, right? So how do I hash out a timing table for an all motor car? It depends largely on your setup and fuel that's being used. But like I said, that puts people off and their brain turns off and they get the deer in headlights right away. So what they want is a general answer. And what I can tell you after tuning LS stuff for like 15 years, if you have pump gas and you want to be conservative, we'll go right up. So let's explain real quick. This is the load versus spark table. Load, RPM, spark amount. So this is wide open throttle, hopefully, very high load, low vacuum. So when you're idling and you're pulling 5 inches of vacuum, that's -5. That's right here. So say your idle is in between 5 and 1500 and around 5 inches of vacuum. This is the amount of ignition it's going to have, understand? And as you accelerate and drive in vacuum, you're going to be approximately here, and decelerating or at very light throttle, high vacuum cruise, you're going to be down here. Wide open, you're going to be up here, approximately. So you want to act accordingly, and you want to enter in information here that's safe and conservative for your first trial runs of your car, correct? So what I can recommend is you need to start the car and you need to hash out your IAC numbers, and if everything else is good, if you think you're good and you're ready to go, you're going to go straight into your spark table here. The Holley will have generated a base that has numbers all over, so I just didn't want to distract anybody. I wanted to go with what I have here. So what I would tell you is, if you're idling at 850 and 5 inches of vacuum, you're going to want to go in here. So if you get your little following cell, you're going to get a little yellow dot when you connect live, and you're going to be approximately where my mouse pointer is. You're going to want to adjust a block approximately that big, because it's going to interpolate. It's going to grab data. My nose is where the map sensor is right now, and it's getting information from all adjacent cells, everything in the vicinity. So what I can tell you is anywhere between 18 to 22 degrees is suitable for a lot of camshafts as a general answer. So you can type in 20 here. Pay no attention to the murderous scene you will see. Once you start making changes, you're going to get temperature map changes. The nice thing about a feature like this is it lets you know if you have some crazy numbers going on. So you're going to want to fire in approximately 20, 18 to 22 degrees for your idle. And then you're going to want to go below your idle, and you're going to want to put too much spark in. So what this helps you with is when the car wants to stall, it's going to get ignition advance, and it's going to want to live, accelerate. And what this does is it alleviates dips, wandering, waviness, unsettling idle, everything else. From there, I can tell you that you're going to have to cruise the car, but you're going to want to go below your idle-ish area. And I would say to start with like 36 down in this populated area. You're probably going to add to this. You're probably going to add to a bunch of spots. But that's fine. That's later on. And then what I can also tell you is if you're running pump gasoline, even if you're running 93, my recommendation is right off idle, we're going to take these 3 cells up here about an inch to 0, because depending on your intake setup, you may not hit 0, you may pull vacuum. In fact, it's more than likely that you will not hit barometric pressure. Your intake was probably not as efficient as you think. That's not a problem. Take these 3 from roughly -1 to 0, and yes, down low, these engines don't like a lot of spark, especially if you're running 87. If this is your daily or something similar, you are honestly going to want to start at about 11 or 12 degrees down low. And people might think that's strange, but if you test the amount of power and torque you're making on a dyno, engine dyno, chassis dyno, you can put 12 here and you can put 18 here and you will make the same amount of torque. So you're not getting any benefit out of the increased timing other than pumping loss or possibly pre-ignition and other things. There's no reason. So again, we're also trying to start from somewhere safe, correct? Everybody wants to be safe, but then they want to anyway, this is a safe start. So I would assume that most people are going to do a mild camshaft and that they have a truck intake. So what's going to happen is it's going to quit. It's going to make peak torque more than likely about 5,500 max. And then if you have a 6-liter, it's going to make torque earlier, peak torque earlier. And then if you have 5.3, it's going to come later. 4.8, it's going to come later. What I would recommend is approximately 5,500. Do those 3 cells again and fire in 18 up top. And then what you're going to do is take the 3 and you're going to want to go back to probably 2,500-ish. And then you can hit fill selected and it's going to blend it. And from there, you can go all the way down to these 36 numbers and it will blend this also. And then you can do a little bit of blending everywhere, right? Fill selected, fill selected, fill selected. So you're going to want to, this has 12s in it. You're going to want to type in the 20 degrees here also and refill. And you're just going to want to make it kind of nice and neat. And then again, you're going to want to make sure you don't biff. If all of a sudden you're idling close to where these numbers are all different, you're going to have to check that. I mean, you should not be idling at 1,700. So yeah, you want a healthy idle area. So right off idle here, you can still pump in 20, but as soon as load increases, and then also you generally don't want a sharp edge because the car might transition hard if it's jumping from 20 to 12 immediately. So you want to do your best to try to do this little, these little smoothing features and everything else. So the temperature map is also nice because you can see we have a bit of a harsh change here. So what happens is when you interpolate a large area, it's grabbing the lows. So you might want to come in here and do a fill column. So what it'll do is it'll go high to low. So this is much smoother and nicer. So you're going to have to, again, investigate this stuff and see where your cruise and everything else is. At cruise and light throttle, you're going to want 36 to 46 in it. So if you're cruising on the highway and you're here, 28 really isn't that optimal. You're going to want to move these numbers up. So when you floor it at, say you have a stick shift car, you floor it at 2,000 and it sits at 2,000, and it does its full sweep from here on. It goes to 18 up top. What I can tell you is, once you get this on a dyno, or once you start checking spark plugs, or once you get to the track and you can quantify a result, adding ignition is actually doing something. Well, let's click on this. Once you, this is safe. If you go to a dyno or something else, this is 99% of setups, this isn't going to blow anything up. If everything else is mechanically sound, if your ignition is actually correct, if your balancer and your elector ring isn't completely failed, this is a perfect spot. A common misconception is if the engine needs a ton of spark. If it's very efficient, if it's like LS3 headed, or just a very efficient build that you did, it actually requires less spark to get a complete burn. That sounds funny, but so a car that has not so desirable burn and efficiency requires more timing lead to ignite the entire mixture. So this is safe. This is where you would start. And what I can tell you, if you have an efficient combination and it's making really good power, you basically going to go right to 18 down low, and then maybe 22 to 24 up top, so we could hit it with 24. And then again, you're not going to want to get to your peak timing until like above 5500 mostly. So we'll go to 52-ish, and we'll blend it again to 27-ish. And we'll go fill rows. What it'll do is it'll blend these rows nice, and then we made a ugliness here. So we're gonna hit fill selected here too. And just keep trying to smooth this thing out. So again, if this biffs your idle area, you're gonna wanna make sure that if you're idling in the 20 area, but like I said, it's important to have some smooth timing transitions for the engine to run smooth in and out of these areas. It's important. If you have like lurchiness and whatnot, this is why. So yeah, it's very easy to just continue to try to make a nice color chart here. So this is obviously for like a fairly decent pump 93 setup. 18 on the hit, 24 up top. Some of them might like a little bit higher if you're running E85 or race. What's nice is at the dyno, if you make a hit live with this, you see the number, right? You go right here and you go to your wide open cells and you hit offset, throw 2 degrees at it. Boom, 20 down low, 26 up top. What you're gonna see is if you make the same torque down low, but you pick up 5 horsepower per degree up top, you're gonna wanna feed that. So say the car doesn't make any measurable amount of power with the ignition advance you just threw in. You can take it back out. I just hit Control Z to undo. You can do the offset, like what I did is I added 2. So there's 2 in here. You can go back in and hit -2, pull the 2 back out. Say the car really likes ignition at high RPM. It likes to breathe up top. 24 just doesn't seem sufficient. Power seems to be leveling off at 6100. Go to 6000 and throw 2 at it. And if it knows is at 67, throw 2 at it. So now you have somewhat a decent transition from 18 on the hit to 28 up top. You can go in again and lightly hit smooth, and it'll smooth you out. And basically that's how it's done. That's what I recommend, is the 12 and 18 for pretty much every setup. Unless you're familiar more with this, you probably wouldn't even be watching this video, but that's what you're gonna want. You're gonna want to be conservative on the hit and get it all in up top, past peak torque. Usually once torque starts to fall off, horsepower will level. Sometimes it wants another degree or 2 or more all the way up. If it continues to want to make power, you got to feed that. So that's my best advice for that. If it's E, funny enough, some cars like ignition on motor and some don't. It all depends. That's why you set this up and you try to get a measured result, right? The other thing we'll jump into quick is go right to target air fuels. So what I can tell you is this is a good target air fuel. This car has E85. So you would go into your target air fuel table. Let's go in here and zero it out, right, boys? Again, at your idle, you want approximately I tell people the easiest way to do this is do 14.0 everywhere, because 14.7, people are obsessed with that number because that's a narrow band. That's like the number that the federal emissions compliance, everyone has decided on 14.7, narrow bands use it. All of the stuff is set up for that. So I just usually like to use solid numbers. It's easier in my head. Everything else makes more sense. So I would also say that cammed cars and everything else don't necessarily like getting close to 15 to 16. Some of these cars honestly idle and run the best with a richer air fuel, 12.5 at idle, 13.5 at idle. So easy way to just, again, this is your starting and you don't know what to do. You want to hash stuff simple. So like I tell people, you go 14 at low load, cruise, and idle. And then as you work your way up into high load, what I would tell you again is if you're on 87, I would say go right to a 12.0. And then you're going to want to, as I mentioned, put somewhat of a transition in here as you go. And what you might run into is the car has really awful idle vacuum and you're idling in a super rich area. So again, at low RPM and near idle, you can just pad that with a 14.0. So it's not interpolating and grabbing cells and screwing up your air fuel. So now the car has a 12.0 wide open. It has 12 to 18 degree sweep on your spark table. It's very nice and safe. You can get the car hashed out. And these are very, the car will put down good numbers and you'll be able to work from there. So these are good starting points. This is what you're going to want to do, in my opinion. And then once I'm on the dyno and I have someone set up like this and everything else is looking good, on pump, I would say honestly, all motor LS car usually makes the same power from an 11.8 to a 12.8 air fuel. And what I could recommend is the 11.8 or the 12.0 for if it's a drift car and it's going to be under power and have the tar beaten out of it. Erroring on a little bit of rich will keep everything cooler. Understand? So if you're sacrificing 10, 15 horsepower, I mean, you have an all motor car and it has 11.8 and people look at a data log and they flip out on you. So you have to say like, hey, I lost 5 horsepower going from a 12.8 to an 11.8. I have 8 cylinders. The average air fuel of those 8 cylinders is safe and low now. There's a lot behind it. So just pushing it for no reason is a means to an end. So I would say that E85 cars, if it's ethanol, you would go to like a 12.6-ish wide open. And then, you know, similar idle, cruise, everything else. And then you can fill selected. So when you go wide open, you'll get a 12.6, probably make good power there. Again, some combos really like a leaner air fuel, and that's up to you. But people are constantly asking, what do? I don't want to blow it up. I would tell you error on conservative. Torching a ringland or hurting something for 5 rear wheel is, you know, you're going to be like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. So, and then again on E, you would do similar. You would start lower and then work your way up. There's no need to pump this thing with 36 degrees flat everywhere. It's just too much. So I hope that you get a little bit of understanding how the load tables work, how to blend one in nice, how to get a good result, where to start, how to be safe, everything else. I'd like to do another video where we like check on logs and some other stuff. I'd love to put a car on and maybe record what I change and show you guys, even though I do that in most of my tuning videos. But questions have come up a lot about all motor. What do I need to do? What should I target? What is safe? And people will throw all sorts of numbers out. But what I'm telling you here is where I start with almost everything, and then you work your way up using some sort of measuring device. The track, like a GPS data logger, like a Draggy, a dyno, something. So if you do this and everything is good, by the time you get to a dyno, you'll be much better off. Whoever's tuning it will be thankful you don't have outrageous spark or air fuels in the car and heard it before you bring it to them. Everything else. So let me know if you have more questions. I would like to do more of these. I'm going to try to do a lot of them showing configuration and setup. There's a lot of new stuff happening with this stuff, so I'd like to cover it all. But this was one that came up a bunch and no one has any good info on it, and I felt like I got some time quick, I'll hammer this out. So let me know if you learned something or if you are so brain dead after this and some monotony that it was awful. But hope you enjoy. Thanks. Bye.